Tell us that real quick.
My name's Dick Jordan. I'm the communications director for the United States Auto Club. And the Speedrome, as far as I'm concerned, goes back to when I was that tall because my mom and dad used to take me there all the time. But as far as actually working at the Speedrome, I started with USAC in 1968. So I've been there for a lot of its existence, probably.
Now, you're one of the people that's very much aware of the history of open wheel racing. The Indianapolis Speedrome goes back to the 1940s, but when it started up, there was no United States Auto Club back in 1941 when the Indianapolis Speedrome opened. Racing, in theory, was supposed to be run with an iron fist by the American Automobiles Association, but from what I understand, the Indianapolis Speedrome was what was not so indelicately called a outlaw track at that time.
No, actually, the United States Auto Club was born in late 1955 due to a lot of pressure from a number of sources. There were a lot of incidents in the sport in 1955, which led the AAA, or American Automobile Association, to decide to discontinue their involvement in auto racing. And they announced that at the end of the 1955 season that they would no longer be involved. So Tony Hallman, who was the president of the and owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway at the time, decided that it was time to get everybody together and try to come up with a suitable replacement organization to conduct major motorsports. And there were some meetings held in late 1955, one specifically at the Indiana State Fairgrounds in September of that year, at which time they decided to form this new group with the help of the car owners and drivers and the mechanics and the people who were involved in the sport at that time. And they decided to call it the United States Auto Club. And they put a charter together and decided that they would begin operations with the opening race of the 1956 season. The last race under AAA sanction was in December of 1955. It was an indoor midget race at the Allen County Coliseum up in Fort Wayne. 2 weeks later, the United States Auto Club debuted also at the Allen County Coliseum with an indoor midget race. That was the beginning of the United States Auto Club, and it's been a long journey for the last 59 years.
From what I understand,
a lot of which.
From what I understand, the Speedrome has been in and out of United States Auto Club racing from time to time. It actually was, what was the name? It was called a Mutual Midget Racing Association, something like that?
I believe so. That would have been before USAC.
Yes.
And I saw a lot of those races. My mom and dad used to go to the races a lot in the early 50s. So I had a lot of exposure at the Indianapolis Speedrome to midget racing and figure eight racing and some other things. USAC, in its 59 years, the Indianapolis Speedrome has basically served as a home for USAC, and that's borne out by the fact that there have been a record number of events under USAC sanction. No track anywhere can boast as many USAC events as the Indianapolis Speedrome. Right now, we're at 496 races at the Speedrome and still counting.
And most of them have been midget racing because the Speedrome was born in the era when midget racing was the major form of motorsports in the United States.
That's correct. I think all of our exposure at the Speedrome has been open wheel racing, so it's a great history.
Although there may have been one or two stock car races in that time.
We had some modified races and some other things, but for the most part, you're correct. There was an occasional race that was not open wheel, but probably 95% of those races were open wheel.
What is it about the Indianapolis Speedrome that appealed to a young Dick Jordan?
Just the spectacle, the excitement, obviously. As a youngster, I mean, most of my time was spent in the grandstands, the old concrete grandstands. I spent a lot of time in those grandstands. And of course, I didn't have the access to the pit area or the people like I do now. So it was a little different back then. It was purely from a spectator standpoint. I really didn't start officiating or getting more involved in the sport until sometime in the late 60s. So.
Was it the experience as a race fan of the Speedrome that encouraged Dick Jordan to want to be, we can call more closely with the United States Auto Club as a race official?
You know, I'm not so sure that's the case. My exposure to USAC was pretty early. Matter of fact, and I've never told this story, it's kind of interesting. We had a guy who used to call on my dad downtown at his business and sold ads for the Indianapolis Star. And his wife worked at USAC. So every year when the USAC yearbook came out, he would always bring me a copy of that, and it was like Christmas. I mean, when he brought that, that was Christmas to me, to get that book and see all the stats and the photos and things in there. And that's when I acquired an affinity for USAC through those books. And then when I met Donald Davidson in the mid-1960s, right after he came over to the United States and began working for the Speedway, actually for USAC, I got a little bit closer to the sport, and he introduced me to Henry Banks at USAC, and in 1968 Henry hired me, and the rest is history. So it's been a long association with USAC, and to pinpoint it back when I first got that interest is kind of hard because it's been most of my life.
The United States Auto Club has an indelible association with the Indianapolis 500 because the people who ran the Indianapolis 500 were the leading lights in creating the organization, but it also took tracks such as the Indianapolis Speedrome to keep the USAC running. Maybe you could explain that.
Well, obviously, the lifeblood of our organization are the people who put on the events. I mean, USAC, as a sanctioning body, we're kind of like the circus. We bring the event to a venue, and without racetracks, we're out of business, basically, racetracks and fans. So we owe our existence to the people who have these facilities and can welcome us in to put on a show. We basically come in and put on the race, put on the show. We don't sell tickets, we don't get involved in concessions, so it's more of a kind of like a circus atmosphere. You know, they hire us to come in and put on the show. And without those kind of people, without people like the Indianapolis Speedrome, and with as many races as we've conducted at the Speedrome, obviously the Speedrome is a huge part of USAC's success through the years.
One of the key parts of that association, I believe you were associated with it because that was back in the 1980s when ESPN came along. I was looking for programming and set up a Thursday night series of televised races from the Indianapolis Speedrome that was one of the things that changed open racing as from the grassroots and started to really make people understand what it was all about. You were around for that. Tell us what it was like.
You bet. It was interesting. We hadn't really been that heavily involved in television until that point in time. We'd done some, but it had been sporadically, and it really wasn't on a consistent basis, and it wasn't of the captivating nature as the Thunder Series was. The Thunder Series was unique because most of it was on a Thursday night. It was Thursday Night Thunder. And that's a night when most people didn't have a whole lot to do, so they sat home and watched racing. And that was pretty spectacular for all of us and our participants, obviously, the people like the Jeff Gordons and so on, who built their name through this series. A lot of Jeff Gordon's success relates right back to the Thunder Series, and there are other people like that as well. And it was fun because, first of all, it's a Thursday night. It's not a night we usually went racing, so it gave us something to do on Thursday nights. But it was more than that. It was the heightened awareness of what we did that helped build our brand and our success, not only for us but for all of our participants. And it changed the course of motorsports, so to speak. And it got a lot more people involved in becoming fans. and putting people in the seats, which is what this is all about.
What I understand, it gave a brand new credibility to the United States Auto Club and their brand of open-wheeled racing back in 1982, a credibility that continues even to these days. It has launched a number of careers, and it really started with the Indianapolis Speedrome back in the 1980s, and people like Larry Nuber and Bob Jenkins, who really made that happen through USAC.
Yeah, it was a pretty good mix of people who contributed to that. And the talent on air helped push it along. Obviously, the Larry Rices and the Gary Lees and people like that. It was a great bunch of people who had a passion for the sport, and it came across on TV and benefited all of us.
But it's also interesting because it's also launched a brand new generation of participants, which is continuing even to this day. Because in the days that the Thursday Night Thunder series started, your typical race driver would be in their 30s. Now you're getting drivers that are in their teens that have been encouraged by what they see on television. Again, that started with the Speedrome series, didn't it?
Well, a lot of that, obviously, as you know, because of television, it gave these people a place to let people know what they were doing, but it also, for the most part, brought the sponsorship aspect because the sponsors saw a value to what they were giving to these teams because now they're getting airtime on television, and it was an explosion, so to speak, not only of new teams, but as you said, younger people. And it's amazing now to look back at the Jeff Gordons, because he was kind of a leader in that category because he started racing at a very early age, but he was successful at a very early age, which hadn't really happened too much in our sport before then. But now, I mean, it's crazy now because you have kids, little bitty kids running quarter midgets and moving right into Ford Focus midgets and other things, and there's